Hello, I'm Bill Solis, the founder of Prophecy Depot Ministries, and I'm delighted today to be presenting to you from my new book called The Final Prophecies, the prophecies that happen in the second half, the last 3.5 years of the tribulation period. You know, ancient biblical predictions are about to roll off their parchments and pound down on the pavement, and they will pack a powerful global punch. There's quite a few of them, but they won't all happen at one time. They'll happen in various stages through sequences of powerful events, one building upon another. So the Final Prophecies is book 4 in an end time series. It started with the Now Prophecies, the Next Prophecies, the Last Prophecies, and now the Final Prophecies. The Now Prophecies are those prophecies that are the unfulfilled ancient biblical predictions that appear to be imminent, which means that they could happen now at the present time. These foretellings have either minor or no remaining preconditions inhibiting them from happening at the present time. Now the Now Prophecies then segue into and include the disaster in Iran in Jeremiah chapter 45 dealing with Elam, the destruction of Damascus in Isaiah 17, the toppling of Jordan in Zephaniah 2 and Jeremiah 49, the terrorization of Egypt in Isaiah 19, the final Arab-Israeli war in Psalm 83, the decline of America, and I think we find that in Ezekiel 38 verse 13, the expansion of Israel. We find numerous prophecies where Israel expands into the promised land, and the vanishing of the Christians, commonly referred to as the rapture. Then come the next prophecies. Now the next prophecies have at least one or more significant preconditions prohibiting them from their final fulfillment. Although these next prophecies appear to be presently stage setting, their completion is being prevented by some other epic prophetic event or series of events, namely some of the Now Prophecies. Then we get into what those could entail would be the destruction of Russia in Ezekiel 38, the Magog invasion. The upholding of God's holy name in that event, we find that in Ezekiel 39 verse 7. The decline of Islam. Yes, Allah is about to lose his Akbar, his greatness. There's going to be the construction of the temple, the third Jewish temple, the harlot world religion, the ecclesiastical Babylon of mystery Babylon, the 144,000 Jewish witnesses and evangelizers. And we also have the rise of the Antichrist, and unfortunately there will be severe Christian martyrdom that happens during this period. The next prophecies introduced what is called the post-rapture pre-tribulation time gap. Now many prophecy teachers believe in this gap. It wasn't something that was introduced per se, other than it brings it forward and gives reasons why it probably exists, because you have a church age and you don't necessarily go right into the tribulation once the rapture happens. You have this unspecified period of time. I call it the post-rapture pre-tribulation gap period, because it's not the rapture that starts the tribulation period, it's the false covenant confirmation by the Antichrist. We find that in Isaiah 28 verses 15 through 18 and Daniel 9 verse 27. That is what triggers the tribulation. Most all would agree to that as the commencement point. The last prophecies, the prophecies that happen in the first half of the tribulation. There'll be signs and lying wonders. The harlot world religion of mystery Babylon flourishes during this period of time. There'll be worldwide Christian revival, good news. However, there'll be Christian martyrdom by the harlot. The two witnesses will be on the scene preaching in Jerusalem. There'll be the sealed judgments of Revelation 6, the trumpet judgments of Revelation 8 and 9. And then there'll be the unholy harlot and Antichrist alliance. And the 10 kings will come on the scene and align with the Antichrist as well. So those prophecies are in the Last Prophecies book. Now, when we look at the timeline of the end times, after the rapture, you've got 7 stages that we look at. Number 1, you've got the post-rapture pre-tribulation time gap. It's a period of unspecified length of time. Then you have the midpoint where the false covenant gets confirmed and starts the tribulation, number 2. Number 3, the first half of the tribulation period, which goes for 3.5 years, 1,260 days, 42 months. It's often alluded to under those time frames. And then you have the midpoint where there's a lot of prophecies going on, stage number 4. And I will be talking about a lot of those prophecies today because we cover them in the Final Prophecies book. Number 5, you have the second half of the tribulation period, again the 3.5 year period. Then number 6, you have a 75-day interval, and number 7, you have the millennium. Now these books line up with the Now Prophecies and the Next Prophecies in the gap, and the Next Prophecies could actually go over into the first half of the tribulation, which is where we have the Last Prophecies book covering those prophecies. The Final Prophecies book will be covering the second half of the tribulation period, and that's what we'll be talking about in this presentation. And then for those of you who want to know, well, how will all of these prophecies play out How will they affect me and my family? We've actually put forward a novel. We run a Jewish family and an American family through these prophecies. How will they affect you? We'll show you that as they affect these families as they go through these prophecies. Now we get into the prophecies I'll be speaking about that are in the Final Prophecies book. We'll start with the midpoint prophecies of the tribulation period, where you have a war in heaven. Satan and his fallen angels get cast to the earth. You have the death and resurrection of the Antichrist, the desolation of the harlot world religion, and the death of the two witnesses. The good news is they resurrect and ascend to heaven. The trumpet sounds the third woe judgment, which unleashes the bowl judgments, which within them the wrath of God is completed. You have the abomination of desolation, and then you have the emergence of the false prophet, who then instructs to build the image, to construct the image of the beast, and they put forward the mark of the beast, and the cashless global economy of the Antichrist kicks in at that point into the second half of the tribulation. And then you have the starting of the campaign of the persecution of the Jews. Then when we get into the second half of the tribulation, covered also in this book, you've got the woman in the wilderness of Revelation chapter 12. This is the Israeli remnant of Jews who flee for protection from the campaign of genocide by the Antichrist. They end up going to Basra, ancient Basra, which is in Petra, Jordan. Then you have the 7 bowl judgments. Those are very powerful. God's wrath is completed in them. Then you have the 8 stages of the Armageddon campaign. The Antichrist assembles his allies. The destruction of commercial Babylon, Revelation chapter 18. The fall of Jerusalem. The Antichrist puts his armies at Petra, where the remnant is housed up, the woman in the wilderness. The national regeneration of Israel. The second coming of Jesus Christ, the superhero, comes back. He rescues the remnant, and he takes out the armies of the Antichrist and the Antichrist in the valley of Jehoshaphat battle. And then Christ has his victory ascent up to the Mount of Olives. This is where the Final Prophecies book covers, and this is what we'll be teaching on today. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, Bill, I believe in Jesus Christ. I won't be here for these prophecies that you're writing about in the Final Prophecies. I won't be here for the midpoint of the tribulation or the last second 3.5 years of the tribulation. I understand. However, that's great news, that we need to talk about that for a moment. If you're a believer today, you're right. The wrath of God gets completed in the bowl judgments, but you shall be saved from the wrath through Jesus Christ, and that's in Romans 5, verses 8 through 9. And it's Jesus who delivers us from the wrath that is to come in 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, verses 10. For God did not appoint us to this wrath, 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 7 through 10. This is all great news. We will be kept from the hour of trial that comes to test the whole world, which would represent that tribulation period. And therefore, we should comfort one another with these words. And if you're a believer today, you should be comforted with these words. This is the good news, because what you're about to hear from me today lacks in good news. When we get into the tribulation, you find that unless those days are shortened, no flesh would survive. But this has to be taught to people. The other good news is Jesus, meanwhile, is building mansions for you if you're a believer in heaven. We're told in John 14, it says, "Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also, and where I go, you know, and you know the way where to go." So you see right there, he talks to you personally. 9 times he mentions you, your, etc. Imagine the greatest home you've ever seen on TV or in the neighborhood that your dream home you'd love to have at some point. Then multiply that by some infinite number that Jesus Christ, who's the creator of the universe, he's preparing a place for you presently and that sort of thing, if you are a believer in Jesus Christ. The Word became flesh. It dwelt among us, Jesus Christ. Now, Thomas asks him, how do we know the way to get to heaven? And Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. In John 14:6, he goes on to say, and no one gets to the Father except through me. That is the good news. That is if you're a believer in Christ today. However, there's a warning. There's a strong delusion that's coming for those who receive not the love of the truth. The lie is coming. We're told in 2 Thessalonians, it says, and with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth, Jesus Christ, that they might be saved. And for this reason, God will send them strong delusion, that they should believe the lie, that they all may be condemned who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. And that will be perpetrated at the time of the Antichrist's arrival, the coming of the lawless one, which is according to the working of Satan, with all power, signs, and lying wonders. This will happen at a time when the church is gone, and the supernatural is the natural, and the paranormal is the new normal, folks. It's going to be an unprecedented period of time, and this is what we'll be talking about today. Now I want to start, we're going to take a little different teaching approach here. We're going to step outside of the forest to look at the trees, and I want to talk about the divine debate that happens between God and Satan. When Satan rebelled and took a third of his angels with him, they followed in his rebellion. They left their proper domain, their first habitation. And since they've done that, in order to justify that departure, they have been in this debate with God. They've been trying to argue he's got character flaws, he's not worship worthy, and this debate plays out heavily on the earth, and it plays out extremely heavily in the second half of the tribulation period. Satan is going to try to perpetrate a lie. So let's talk about this situation and see how Satan lays this stuff out when he gets to here on earth and starts perpetrating the lie without restraint. This starts in the garden with the big lie. God had told Adam and Eve that you could eat of all the trees in the garden except one, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And if you did, you would die. And Satan comes along and attacks God's word and says, the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die, for God knows that in the day that you eat, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Well, about 4,000 years later, we find out there's a bigger truth, and that is, Jesus Christ says this, he says, Satan, he was a murderer from the beginning. Yes, because when Adam and Eve ate from that tree, God was correct. Death started to come into the planet. And then he says, murder from the beginning, and does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, for he is a liar and the father of it. Now, how do you think Satan takes to those allegations? Do you think he's going to just stand by idly and let them brush them off? I don't think so. I think this hit him at the core. God came back with the truth, and now Satan's going to respond to that. Satan was found out around 52 AD when Paul wrote the letter to the 2 Thessalonians that he would have a season without restraint where he could perpetrate what he wanted to perpetrate, that he could convince people that Jesus Christ was not the way, the truth, and the life, that there's an alternative to the truth. And that is what Satan believes he's found and what he's going to try to perpetrate. So we find out in 2 Thessalonians 2, the mystery of lawlessness is already at work, and he who now restrains will do so until he is taken out of the way. And the lawless one, the Antichrist, will be revealed, whom the Lord Jesus Christ will consume with the breath of his mouth and destroy with the brightness of his coming. So Satan realizes there's a time coming, and that time is approaching rapidly near, and I believe it happens with the rapture of the church. The Holy Spirit is told, who I believe is restraining, he's told no longer restrain Satan, back off. I think the Holy Spirit multitasks. He's convicting the world of sin. He's indwelling believers, but he's also restraining Satan in my estimation. He's told to back off and let Satan have his time, his season to perpetrate his lie. So the interesting thing, though, is that in the same verse, he said, yes, you won't no longer be restrained, but guess what? You're not going to be successful because Jesus Christ will consume your seed, your Antichrist, with the breath of his mouth and destroy him at the brightness of his coming. Very interesting. Satan still thinks he can win, but God said in the same verse that is not going to happen. So let's pick it up from the rapture. I'm going to play a video for you, and we're going to see what happens from that point forward once the rapture happens.
Jesus Christ is coming back for his church. The Bible says in Matthew chapter 24, verse 42, watch therefore, for you do not know the hour your Lord is coming. I want you to know, church, that Jesus Christ could come this month, or he might come next week, or he could even come...
Wow. Jesus came and emptied out the church except for a handful of people that were simply playing church and not truly believers. We look here, and we're going to call this gentleman Johnny, who's been left behind. Now, we all know a Johnny in our lifetime. This is why we should care, folks, about what I'm going to be teaching you today. It may be a spouse, it may be an adult son or daughter, it could be a grandparent or a grandchild, it could be your neighbor, it could be someone in your workplace, someone somewhere you know in your sphere of influence. If Jesus Christ were to come today, would be left behind and have to face the perilous tribulation period. So what's the first thing that happens when Satan is no longer restrained and lawlessness is going to come to fruition? The lawless one will be revealed. Well, the first thing he does, we find out in the seal judgments, is the white horseman comes on the scene. The first seal, Revelation 6, says the conqueror. Now I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard one of the four living creatures saying with a voice like thunder, "Come and see." And I looked, and behold, a white horse. He who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. So the first thing that Satan does is he puts his point man on the scene, the seed of the serpent. Now he embarks out to conquering and to conquer. He goes on to his threefold campaign. He becomes a world political leader. He confirms a covenant with Israel. We found that in Isaiah 28 verses 15 and 18 as a political leader. They trust him like Israel trusted Bill Clinton in 1995, I believe it was, with the treaty with Jordan, and Jimmy Carter in 1979 with the treaty with Egypt. He will be that type of character politically that Israel will trust along with the other signatory. He will implement a cashless global economy as a political world leader. He will also be a military ruler. He'll be waging and winning wars as per Daniel 11 verses 40 through 45. And he'll also become a supreme religious leader. We find out in Daniel 11, 2 Thessalonians 2, and Revelation 13, and I'll be talking about some of those prophecies in my presentation. But even though he's on the scene, he does not come and receive his kingdom at that particular time. Mankind has a double religious jeopardy. The first leg of that religious jeopardy is in Revelation 17 with ecclesiastical Babylon, yes, mystery Babylon, the harlot world religion. And we find out in Revelation 17 verses 4 and 5, this woman that John saw was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication, and on her forehead name was written Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. Now when we talk about fornication, we're not talking about sexual scenarios, we're talking about spiritual idolatry. She's filled with spiritual idolatry. She's preaching a counterfeit gospel. The bride has been taken out in the rapture. You have a counterfeit bride here. Who is she? But anyway, she comes on the scene first, and she takes control and reigns over the world, and we find out the Antichrist gets into an unholy alliance with her. We find out that he's actually playing a subservient role to prop her up. We find out in Revelation chapter 17, verse 3, that this woman is sitting on the scarlet beast, being the Antichrist. We find out in Revelation 17:7 that the woman is actually being carried by the Antichrist to her heights. Now, little details about the harlot. Now, this is primarily going on starting in the gap, post-rapture gap, and on into the first half of the tribulation period. She rules over many nations. You see the verses corresponding to these subtitles. She's headquartered in a great city. The city is located upon 7 hills, which was the eternal capital, was called Rome, was a city that sat on 7 hills. Now, I personally believe this is dealing with Rome. I'll get into that a little bit more in a moment. She panders to political leaders. It says that the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. She is the religious opiate of the masses because it says they are drunk with the wine of her fornication. Remember, this is spiritual idolatry. She's propagandizing and propagating throughout the world during this period of time. Now, she has martyred believers in the past, whoever she represents, and she is going to martyr believers again in the future, Revelation 17:6. Now, that's an important point we're going to come back to. She'll be ultimately hated by the 10 kings who form a political alliance with the Antichrist at the midpoint of the tribulation. They will be desolated. She will overextend her usefulness. They will desolate her, take her out of the way, and she will be replaced by the Antichrist as the 10 kings give their kingdoms to the beast. Now, we find out that she's been drunk with the blood of the saints in the past and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus that will happen in the future. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. This is what John saw, and he marveled with great amazement. Now, in the past, some people believe that the harlot world religion will be nothing more than an interfaith super church that embraces all the world religions, and it'll be an ecumenical embrace. But in the past, there was never such a precedent where there was a super church with an ecumenical embrace that killed the saints of God in the past. So I discount that as an option. Now, there are 2 other religions that are predominant that are guilty of the blood of the saints. That would be Islam and Roman Catholicism. Of course, Roman Catholicism happened in the Inquisitions between the 1200s and 1500s. Now, Some people, I don't believe it's Islam. Matter of fact, if you want to learn more about this, I've got a debate I did with Joel Richardson, who believes that Islam is the harlot world religion and that Mecca is the great city. We have a 3-hour debate. It was a brotherly discussion with a lot of research into it. And it says Mystery Babylon, the identity of Mystery Babylon, is it in Mecca or Rome? Of course, I argued that it was in Rome. And also I cover why I believe the Catholic Church is the harlot and why she's centered in the great city of Rome in my book called The Next Prophecies. And I also have a DVD called The Catholic Church in the Tribulation Period. Yes, folks, the Catholic Church is going to be cast into the sickbed of the Great Tribulation Period. Now, back to the first leg of mankind's double religious jeopardy. What is going on with the supernatural Marian apparitions that have been happening through the church age? You know, Mary, she died a couple thousand years ago, but the Catholic Church says, through papal infallibility, the assumption of Mary, that she never died. And therefore, since they believe she's never died, but assumed to heaven, that she can keep making these guest appearances, which she's been doing like in 1531 in Guadalupe, Mexico, 1858 in Lourdes, France, 1917 in Fatima, 1968 through 70 in Zaytun, Egypt. I've got that highlighted. I'm going to tell you why in a moment. Medjugorje in 1981. Some of these, as you can see, are relatively recent. Now, the Catholic Church believes this is the Blessed Mother, Our Lady of Fatima, the Queen of All, etc. She's got multiple names. They do pilgrimages to these places. The Catholics do. They believe that they've accredited a lot of these apparitions. There's so many more than you don't even see on this list. Some are accredited, some are not. What is the end game here? This is not Mary. This is a supernatural phenomena that's real. It's a divine, demonic, feminine. Is there an end game? What is Satan's plans for this woman? Will she be reappearing after the rapture? I wanted to talk about Zaytun for a minute because she says she's going to reappear as she did in Zaytun. Zaytun happened about 70 years ago, about 50 years ago, and it lasted for about 2 years. You see a picture of Gamal Nasser on the slide. He witnessed this. Millions of people witnessed this over the Coptic Church. You can see this on YouTube. You can read about this. This was in modern history. Here's a few things that were noted about it. The apparitions lasted from a few minutes up to several hours and were sometimes accompanied by luminous heavenly bodies, shaped like doves and moving at high speeds. The apparitions were seen by millions of Egyptians and foreigners. Among the witnesses were Orthodox, Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, Jews, and non-religious people from all walks of life. The sick were cured, and blind persons received their sight, but most importantly, large numbers of believers were converted to Roman Catholicism. Now, the apparition herself has said, this is a quote from a visionary from the apparition, "I will be seen by every denomination. I wish to tell you that before my apparitions end completely, I shall be seen by every denomination and religion throughout this world. I will be seen among all peoples, not just for a moment, but everyone will have a chance to see me as I appeared in Zaytun. I shall appear again so everyone may see me. Pray and help my plans to be realized, not just here, but throughout the world." Of course, she wants you to pray the rosary, which is what she initiated in the Catholic Church. So but you know, why would we take her word for it? Some demonic, feminine. What does the Catholic Church believe? Is she reappearing? Is she coming back? Well, here's one of the top Catholic apologists. He writes in his book called Call of the Ages, Marian expert Thomas W. Petrisco. "After the warnings will come the great miracles. Some of these miracles are to be wondrous signs to the world that God exists and that Jesus Christ is Lord." Well, we believe in that. However, here's the catch. Others will confirm the Virgin Mary's apparitions throughout the world. She's pushing to be a code redeemer, a mediatrix, an advocate. Folks, this is not Mary and this is not gospel truth. Now, she will overextend her usefulness as the world reigning religion. The 10 kings will desolate her and they will give their kingdoms to the beast. We're told in it's actually Revelation 17, verses 16 through 17. "And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast," that would represent 10 kings, world political leaders, "these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God has put it in their hearts to fulfill his purposes and to be of one mind and to give their kingdom to the beast." So after they desolate her, they're all in accord. They're going to pass over their kingdom and the things they confiscate over to the Antichrist. Now, you could easily take over now, how do you conquer and desolate a super church? How do you destroy Wicca and Hinduism and all the different world religions? You could easily destroy the Catholic Church's grip You take out the Vatican, a few cathedrals, some of the high-ranking clergy, take their wealth, confiscate it, and give it over to the Antichrist. I believe, personally, that's what happens. Now, let's go back to our divine debate. Now we're getting to the midpoint of the tribulation. The desolation of the harlot, I believe, happens right around that point in time, the middle of the tribulation. A lot of things going on, power-packed into a very short period of time, be it a couple days, a week, maybe even a month, around that midpoint of the tribulation period. The next thing that happens is there's a war in heaven, and Satan gets cast down to earth. This happens probably right after or about the time of the desolation of the harlot. Let's talk about the war in heaven. What is that all about? And why does that break out? Revelation 12, verses 7 through 9 tells us a war breaks out in heaven, and Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, that would be the devil, and his angels, but the devil did not prevail. So the great dragon was cast out, and his angels were cast out with him. Now, so that's going to happen around the midpoint of the tribulation, and we find out more about the details about that. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, "The power of Christ have come, for the accuser of the brethren who accused them before our God day and night has been cast down. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb, and by the word of their testimony, and that they did not love their lives to the death." Okay, now notice that's a loud angel talking about this. Now, who are the brethren that have the testimony, and what is their testimony? They've overcome this by the blood of the Lamb, but why were they killed? Because they were killed for their testimony. So we need to understand, who is Satan accusing day and night in front of God? Consider a case in point with Job, the historical account of Job. In Job 1, we find out that there was this exchange between God and Satan and this divine debate. Satan was traveling to and fro around the earth, and there was a meeting going on in heaven between the sons of God and God, the angels, and Satan shows up, and God says to Satan, "What have you been doing, Satan?" He goes, "Well, I've been traveling to and fro upon the earth." God says, "Have you considered my servant Job?" Now, Satan comes out and accuses Job. He says in Job 1, verses 9 through 11, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side?" And Satan convinced God in a test to touch Job, his values, his property, his children, and God says, "Okay, but do not take his life." So in this episode, Job loses his property and his children and his assets. And then he comes back to meet with God, and Job did not curse God like Satan said he would. So test 2 comes, and God says again, "Have you considered Job?" in another meeting. And so Satan answered, "Skin for skin, yes, all that a man has he will give for his life, but stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will surely curse you to your face." So Satan goes and hits him with boils from head to toe. Tremendous amount of pain Job suffers. Even his wife starts to curse him, starts to say, "Curse God and die." But you know what? That was Satan's accusations of Job in testing him, and God allowed that to happen. But here's what he prevailed, and here's what Job said. Job became God's rebuttal in the divine debate. He says, "Though he slay me," and this is in Job chapter 13, "I will trust him. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and he shall stand at last on the earth. And after my skin is destroyed, as I know that in my flesh I shall see God." Now, that was one account where the brethren, Job was being accused at the time when Job was alive. And then we have another account here in Zechariah 3, verses 1, Joshua the high priest. "Then he showed me Joshua the high priest standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan standing at his right hand to oppose him." The point being is that Satan is accusing people alive at the time for one reason or another, not people of the past. Now, if he's doing that, he's doing it at what time? He's doing it, we're told, when he's deceiving the whole world. This happens at the midpoint of the tribulation when the war in heaven breaks out, as we're talking about. We're told in Revelation 12, verse 9, "So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world." Now remember, supernatural deception with all signs and lying wonders is taking place. The restraint has been removed over 3.5 years ago, and Satan is now deceiving the whole world, and he's got a problem. There's certain people that he's accusing brethren at that time, of that generation, that are becoming God's rebuttal, like Job was God's rebuttal. And we know that signs and wonders are going on at that time. So who's he accusing? Remember those people we showed you earlier? That son, that daughter, that husband, that wife, that neighbor? Is Satan saying things like, "You put a hedge around Joe and Mary from Ohio"? Or you have given good health and safety to neighbors John and Jim from Kansas. Is that why they're with you? You've got a hedge around them. So why is he accusing them? And you know what he's not only doing, he's actually having them killed by the harlot. There's Christian martyrdom going on with the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus at that point in time. Now, this argument is carrying on at this point in time, day and night. Satan is accusing the brethren. Now, at some point, the fallen angels must be thinking, okay, this is getting embarrassing, okay? And the good angels are saying to themselves, and I'm taking liberties here, of course, I don't know what's going to happen in this conversation, but the good angels are going to say, we are so glad that we never left our proper habitation and followed you, left our first estate. Matter of fact, those people, we know Joe and Mary from Ohio, we know John and Jim from Kansas. Matter of fact, we were ministering spirits to them. We loved their testimony for Jesus Christ, God's rebuttal, and you killed them. You took away their free choice. You killed them. Now remember, at this point in time, unlike Job, God said, don't take Job's life, but these people are going to be dying, so Satan has no restraint at all. And so I believe the bad angels are saying, okay, enough already, and the good angels, now here's a couple of verses that talk about what I was just saying. Jude 1 says that Satan and the fallen angels did not keep their proper domain. They left, and they've been arguing with God ever since to justify why they left their proper domain. We find out in Hebrews 1, 13 through 14, that the angels are ministering spirits set forth to minister to those who will inherit salvation. They're watching what's going on, and they're watching Satan kill people that they very likely know. At some point they're saying, you're an idiot. Excuse my French, but you're an idiot, Satan. And so at some point in time, this is falling on deaf ears. Satan's accusations are falling on God's deaf ears. It's not working anymore. He's doing it day and night. God's rebuttal is working. People are coming to the Lord through the testimony of Jesus Christ. They overcome him by the blood of the Lamb. These are the brethren that are dying, I believe, in that verse we read earlier. So Satan has to come up with plan B. And he has a plan B, and that's kill all the Jews on the earth. And from God, if he can do that, he can prove God has a character flaw, that he's a promise breaker. This is what Satan wants to do, that he's not worship worthy. This is why rebellion is what he's been trying to do ever since he rebelled. Because God made a promise that there would be chosen people. He promised Abraham in Genesis 13, 15, and elsewhere. And and those would be, of course, be the Jewish people. And then he said they would have a promised land that those people could dwell upon. So Satan figures if we can kill the Jewish people and take away the land, God can't keep his promise to Abraham that he made, and he's a covenant breaker. And then he can also kill two birds with one stone. He can strand the Savior in heaven if he can kill all the Jews. Because even Jesus, with his own mandate, said, I'm not coming back until you say, in Matthew 23:39, he's talking to the nation of Israel, for I say unto you, you shall see me no more till you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So if Satan can kill all the Jews, he can prevent Jesus from returning. Now, the Jews we find out, well, Michael probably gets wind of this somehow, and of course he's the one involved in the war in heaven. He's the angelic prince of the Jews and the protector of the Jews in Daniel 12, a couple of verses up there. So you imagine this intercourse, exchange. Michael's going, what's this I'm hearing? You're going to try to kill the Jewish people? So at some point, this interplay is going on, and war breaks out in heaven with Michael, and his angels fought out the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, and of course we know the dragon and his angels lose. It appears as though he was outnumbered, because he had a third of the angels. It appears that Michael probably has about 2/3 of the angels. So Satan loses, he gets cast down to the earth, and here's the things that we find when that happens. Back to Revelation chapter 12. Satan's tail drew a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth, and the dragon stood before the woman. Then the woman fled into the wilderness. Again, we're talking about the remnant of Israel fleeing into the wilderness of probably Petra in southern Jordan. That they should feed her there for 1,260 days. That is the second half of the tribulation, the last 3.5 years. But he says to the inhabitants of the earth, woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil knows he has a short time left. He's coming down. He's got only a 3.5 year period left to go. He knows it. He probably doesn't believe it, but he's going to do all he can in that 3.5 years to take as many people as he can to Hades, to kill as many Jews as he can, and as many Christians as he can, because the harlot's no longer killing them. But we found out that the Antichrist will pick up where she left off and will be beheading Christians, especially if they don't take the mark of the beast, which we'll be talking about in just a moment. So we're still talking about the prophecies of the midpoint of the tribulation. Now Satan comes down to the earth with his fallen angels. He's got a problem. His point man's dead. Somehow he gets a mortal head wound, and he's got to resurrect his Antichrist, his seed, so that he can get on with his program. And so it says in Revelation 13, 2 verses 4, and this shows up several times in the chapter 13, and I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. And the world marveled and followed the beast, so they worshiped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast who is able to make war with him? They see a resurrection. The great sign Jesus told the Jews, you seek a sign. He said it would be the resurrection. He gave them the story of Jonah. 3 days will be the Son of Man will be buried in the earth, and he'll be rose again like Job came out of the belly of the whale. That's the super sign. Satan uses it to counterfeit in this counterfeit resurrection. Now, is this a real resurrection? I mean, in John 11:25, Jesus says, I am the resurrection. So some people think this is a counterfeit resurrection. Is it a DNA alteration? Does Satan do something to bring this guy back to life? Whatever the case may be, and I believe it's a true resurrection of some sort, the world will believe it's a resurrection. They'll believe it's a true story, and they will marvel, and they will follow him. This is what people start following him and worshiping him, and they say, who can make war with this guy? So now he's got to deal with several issues. He's going to exalt himself above all that's called God. He's going to seek his supreme religious leader capacity at this point in time. The harlot's been already taken out of the way. The Christians need to be beheaded and killed. They got to be out of the way. The Jews got to be taken out of the way too, because they're practicing Judaism. They're not going to worship him. He's got to go and take out the Jewish worship. And the problem he's got is there's two witnesses in Jerusalem that have been going for the first half of the tribulation that have been tormenting unbelievers who dwell on the earth. Here's some of the qualities and characteristics about them. So we're going to talk about the Antichrist and his Jerusalem tour. We're going to have some liberties. We're going to take some liberties here. Day 1 through day 4, when he goes to Jerusalem, one of the first things he does when he resurrects, in my estimation, he goes to Jerusalem. He's got to take care of some serious business there. He's got to make sure all the religions and people advocating other things than himself are taken out, killed, and out of the way and eliminated. Day 1, let's say this is Friday. We have no idea, but let's say this is Friday. These two witnesses, they have power to prevent rainfall, turn waters to blood, and strike the earth with all plagues. As such, they've been tormenting unbelievers throughout the earth. Now remember, at the time this is going on, the trumpet judgment's been going on. You've had a third of vegetation's been destroyed. A third of the seas have been turned to blood. A third of the ships in those seas were destroyed. Fresh water's been turned bitter. There's been 5 months of a demon locust invasion on unbelievers, people who don't have the seal of God, people who don't have the seal of God. And the sixth trumpet, actually a third of mankind is killed by a 200 million man, I believe, a demonic army. So these are plagues that have been coming through the trumpet judgments going on at this time. Now the inhabitants of the world may not know, they probably don't know these are being outsourced from God. For all they know, maybe they're actually thinking these two witnesses are responsible for these plagues. I don't know, but maybe even the Antichrist would go so far as to say, he's going to kill them, and maybe he will say the plagues will now stop. I don't know, speculating. A little bit more about them. They can't be killed by normal people. People have tried to kill them and harm them because of the torment, but they can kill those that seek to harm them. And they will successfully profess their testimonies, which will likely be preaching about Jesus Christ. And they'll be causing, ultimately, they cause many Jews to actually recognize God. These are verses in Revelation chapter 11. Now, he shows up. He flies into Ben Gurion Airport. He's got to jump in his motorcade with his motorcade group, his security people, and he goes to where these two witnesses are. And we find out that the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit, meaning he's already been resurrected, will make war against them and overcome them and kill them. And their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city. And the peoples who are being tormented will see their dead bodies 3.5 days, peoples around the world, every tribe, tongue, and nation, and not allow their dead bodies to be put in the graves, and those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them, make merry, and send gifts to one another, because these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. In other words, they are going to be elated, ecstatic. Their hero, the Antichrist, who they marveled when he was resurrected, did what no other man could do. He killed the two witnesses who they did not like. Does that mean the plagues are all going to stop? Of course it doesn't, but maybe the Antichrist will feed him that line of nonsense. I don't know. Day 2. Now, meanwhile, the Antichrist, he goes back to his hotel room. He's taken out the two witnesses. That was the first thing on his itinerary. He goes back in the hotel room. The world is watching this. The TV cameras are there. They're giving gifts. He turns on his TV. He's elated. Oh, look at the whole world is marveling, still marveling. I took out the two witnesses. They're giving gifts. Oh, I'm so great. I'm so great. The world loves me. Day 2, he's got an even busier day in store. He's got to go into now this would be Saturday, the Sabbath. Now, again, we're speculating on days and things like that, but he goes into the temple. He's got to stop the temple sacrifices. But we're told in Daniel 9:27, in the middle of the week, the tribulation, he shall bring an end to the sacrifices and offerings that the Jews are conducting in their third temple. Now, this is at the midpoint of the tribulation. Now, when he stops that, he actually annuls the false covenant. We're told in Isaiah 28, verses 18, your covenant with death and Sheol will be annulled, and your agreement with Sheol will not stand. So in other words, he stops the sacrifices and offerings, essentially annuls the false covenant at the midpoint of the tribulation, and then he's got to go forward and do more things while he's in the temple. Now, I believe the cameras are following him in there. They've got cameras on the 2 witnesses out in the streets. They've got cameras following him into the temple. And we find out he's going to desecrate the temple after he stopped the sacrifices and annulled the covenant. He's going to use the abomination of desolation. It says in Daniel 12, verse 11, the daily sacrifice is taken away, and the abomination of desolation is set up, and there shall be 1,290 days. Now, some people believe the abomination of desolation is actually the image of the beast being set up, and it says it'll be set up for 1,290 days. So, and if that's the case, and I personally believe it probably is, that means the false prophet's already been on the scene at this point in time. I'm going to show the false prophet in a later scene, but at this point, the false prophet could actually be on the scene because he's the one that says, let us make an image to the beast. But anyway, if it's the image of the beast or not, it's a very powerful emblematic thing. It's going to be sitting probably in the Holy of Holies, the Kodesh Kodakashim of the Holy of Holies. That was the Hebrew word for that. So it says, he goes on in Daniel 9:27, still that day 2, he shall bring an end to the sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate, dealing, another verse on the abomination and desolation. And now my favorite verse that holds us all accountable, Jesus says, therefore, when you see the abomination and desolation, this is Matthew 24, verses 15, 16, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, that's why we say the Holy of Holies probably, whoever reads, let him understand. Whoever reads, let him understand. Now, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Of course, he's warning the Jewish remnant they need to flee immediately, because at this point, the Antichrist is going to start his genocidal campaign. We find out in Zechariah 12, Zechariah 13, verse 8. He actually kills 2/3 of the Jewish people. Jesus is warning them to get out of there and flee. So we go back to this slide, and it says, whoever reads, let him understand. Well, certainly the Jewish remnant at that time needs to understand this. They need to, they hopefully have read this and need to understand that they need to flee. They need to take Jesus' advice, and they need to get out of this. The 2 witnesses have probably been saying for 3.5 years, this is going to happen. You need to flee to, out of to the mountains, or that sort of thing. They're not all going to open Matthew 24. They'll be fleeing, but they're not all going to open Matthew 24 at this time and say, what did Jesus say? They're going to probably have already heard about this. Matter of fact, many people have probably already fled. But this is not limited to just the Jewish remnant. It says, whoever reads, let him understand. That means everyone who reads. You're reading this right now with me along on this presentation. You need to understand. Well, you might be saying, well, I'm interested in God's word, but I'm not necessarily interested in biblical prophecy. Well, Jesus is saying you need to be interested in biblical prophecy. You need to be interested in all my word, the full counsel of God. And I'm telling you, you need to understand this. Now, from my perspective, I need to understand it because I'm trying to teach people about the dangers of the event that I believe are about to happen very, very soon. Now, whatever the reason, you need to understand, you need to come to terms with God and yourself and ask him, why do I need to understand that? But you do need to understand it. That's a command. That's not a suggestion. And that's for all people who read that. Then we're still on day 2, and now the Antichrist, he's desecrated the temple. The image has been set up more than likely of the beast. And now he's got to exalt himself and show himself as God. Now the world's already marveling and worshiping him. They're giving gifts out for the 2 dead witnesses in the street. But now he's going to up the ante and make everyone exalt himself above all that's God. He's been trying to take out all the other religions. He just did the major deal with the temple. And here he comes, he says in Daniel 11, verse 36, he shall exalt and magnify himself above every God. In Daniel 11:37, he said, he shall have no regard for the God of his fathers, nor any God, for he shall exalt himself above them all. 2 Thessalonians 2 also talks about it. The man of sin who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God, so that he sits in the temple of God and showing himself that he is God. So it's not just empty boasting. He's actually doing something. He's showing himself as God. I believe he's actually performing a miracle, the supernatural signs and lying wonders. The Greek word is apodeiki imeni, which I've totally messed up, but it means displaying or exhibiting or proving. So he's actually showing himself that he is God. He's continuing to marvel people, and they're watching him in my estimation. So now he goes back to his hotel room. He turns on the TV. What a day in the temple. He did all those things. He stopped the covenant. He exalted himself above God. He set up his abomination of desolation, desecrated the temple, pretty much essentially ended Judaism. And he's watching the TV, and they see the desolation in the temple. They see the two witnesses dead on the street. Boy, he couldn't be more proud of himself than ever before. This is just the end of day 2. He's still got 2 more days on his trip. He wakes up the next morning and gets a call from 3 of the 10 kings. Now we're talking about Sunday. And by the way, I said Saturday in that last day 2. Remember, Jesus said, when you see the abomination of desolation, pray that it's not on the Sabbath, pray that it's not in the winter, and pray that you're not pregnant. Well, the Sabbath, of course, all the public transportation closes down in Israel. In the winter, there can be flooding in the wadis over there, and of course, if you're pregnant, you don't want to be pregnant at that time. You'd be fleeing, and it'd be hard to flee with a baby inside of your womb. So, I use the example of the Sabbath. I don't know, but those were warnings Christ said, pray that it's not on the Sabbath. Now, day 3, back in the hotel, he gets a phone call. 3 of the 10 kings get on a conference call with him, and they oppose him. Now, this is interesting because they were all together. They receive authority for 1 hour. This is all in Revelation 17, verses 12 through 17. At one point, they all received authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast, the Antichrist. They were all of one mindset. They submitted their power and authority to the beast. Politically, everything was great. They will hate the harlot and make her desolate, so they actually agreed. She was overextended her usefulness. She's a problem for our political and economic ends. And they gave their kingdoms to the beast after they desolated her. But the problem is, we're told that 3 of the kings actually need to be subdued. Why is it? Did they say we were fine with you? And I don't know this, but I can't think of any other reason why they had to be subdued. They were all on the same team in those bullet points I just showed you. Did they say we were with you politically, economically, but we're not going to worship you as God? You're taking it over the line. We're not buying into that. Well, I don't know if that's the case, but for some reason we're told in Daniel 7, verse 24, that 3 of those kings will need to be subdued. So the Antichrist is, thinking, okay, I'm going to take these guys out. They're going to be problematic for my future goals here with the false prophet. So somehow he will subdue those 3 kings. Now, he wakes up on day 4, and there's some really bad news. He looks on the TV, and oh my God, the 2 witnesses have resurrected. The gift giving is going to stop. They're going to be panicking, going, oh my goodness, these 2 guys have resurrected again, and we thought they were dead. We're told in Revelation 11, verses 11 through 12, after 3.5 days they stood on their feet, and great fear fell upon those who saw them, which is pretty much everybody throughout the world. And they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, come up here. And they ascended into heaven in a cloud, and their enemies saw them. So we have another resurrection and an ascension. So you imagine he shows up in his motorcade with his guns blazing, shooting up in the air. He sees the 2 witnesses go up there into the sky, and he can't get them. He goes, well, that's a problem, but I'm going to keep going forward with my campaign. And then he gets back to his hotel, and in that same hour we're told that after they ascended, there was a great earthquake, and 1/10 of the city fell. 7,000 people were killed, and the rest were afraid and gave glory to God. Now he's back in his hotel room, if it's still standing, and he's got to call the false prophet and say, hey, what happened to our image, our abomination of desolation? Is it still standing in there? Here's a big problem. There's a huge earthquake. I mean, we're talking about 1/10 of the city collapsing and lots of people dying. Okay, so now he returns back from his Jerusalem tour, somewhat empty-handed, having done a lot of what he wanted to do. And now we got to deal with the false prophet and the image of the beast and the mark of the beast. Now he's the king of the world. He's got to take care of the world. He's got to put forward his global cashless economy. They're worshiping the image. It says that the false prophet is going to create this image of the beast. Now we'll find out a few things about the false prophet as we go further. And this is still around the midpoint of the tribulation. The false prophet, we pick up a lot of him in Revelation 13. He performs great signs to deceive those who dwell on the earth. He instructs people to make an image to the beast. He gives breath to the image and enables it to speak, and causes many that would not worship the image to be killed. So you got to worship the image of the beast or you will be killed. Now, if you worship the image of the beast and pledge your loyalty to him as God, then you're able to receive the mark of the beast. It says he causes everyone to receive a mark on their right hand or their forehead. And that mark enables them to be able to buy or sell. No one can buy or sell unless they have this mark of the beast. And I'm going to spend some time talking about the mark of the beast and the technologies I think it involves in a moment. But before that, we're going to talk about another thing that starts to happen at the midpoint of the tribulation, and that's the 7 bowl judgments. God has reserved his wrath for this, the preponderance of his wrath, the worst part of his wrath, for this point in time when the Antichrist is coming forward and he's offering the mark of the beast. The image of the beast has been established. We're told about the bowl judgments in Revelation 15:1. Then I saw another angel, another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels having the 7 last plagues, for in them the wrath of God is complete. These 7 bowl judgments are unprecedented. They're more powerful than the seals and the trumpets. They start with loathsome sores on the marked ones. People who take the mark of the beast, they get hit with loathsome sores. I'll talk about that in a minute. The sea turns to blood, and the sea life therein dies. So it's sea. Some people say it's all seas. It could be a major sea. Fresh waters turn to blood, so the drinking water is scarcely found. Scorching heat on the 4th bowl. Curses God. You see the parallel verses down there. The fifth and 6th and 7th, we'll be talking about quite a bit as I get closer to the end. The beast's throne is struck, and the beast's kingdom goes dark. The 6th, the kings of the east cross the Euphrates. It dries up. The 3 flog like demons, deceive the armies through signs and miracles, to go to Armageddon to fight against God in the great battle of the day of God Almighty. Then there's a huge, great earthquake in the 7th one, hailstones. Hailstones that are probably about the 57 pounds. John Wilbur would say they're about 100 pounds, the size of a talent, a Hebrew talent, the weight of a Hebrew talent. Cities will fall, islands will flee, mountains will disappear. So you can see this is unbelievable. God's wrath is going to come out, and even to the point where the greatest earthquake that ever happened is going to happen. We'll talk about that in a moment. But I want to talk about the loathsome sores for a minute. Now, some people think, well, you know, are those going to be boils? We don't know. Some people think, well, this might be an allergic reaction, because they're only going to come to the people that take the mark of the beast. So the first thing they do is they get hit with this plague, and they're going, whoa, you know, how come I'm getting these loathsome sores? And is this an allergic reaction? Is this a flaw in the manufacturer defect in the mark? What is this? So the dermatologist, you can imagine, will be extremely busy trying to explain this. Now, we find out in the 5th bowl judgment that the people still have sores, painful sores, and they're blaspheming God. So at some point they're going to realize, the dermatologist will say, no, we don't necessarily have a cure for this. This stuff is still coming. It's still, and they're going to find out soon it's only coming to the people that take the mark of the beast. And at some point they're going to have to make the determination that this is a divine judgment, in my estimation. And it is a divine judgment, so I think God will get the credit for it being a divine judgment. So those are those various bowls. But I want to take and talk to you about the 5th bowl judgment for a minute. The throne of the beast is struck. Now remember, by the time these judgments start to happen, the Antichrist has control. His kingdom is through the expanse of the entire world. He's going to have a cashless global economy that's being implemented, and that's already in implementation by the time we get to the 5th bowl judgment. So his kingdom now has the expanse of the whole globe, the whole world. So when we find out that the throne of the beast is hit and his kingdom is turned dark, let's talk about that on a global, grander scale. The throne of the beast gets struck in the 5th bowl, Revelation 16:10, and I believe that's the destruction of commercial Babylon. That when he gets, that's where his commercial headquarters will be. I personally think that's in Rome. Other people would say that's in different places. Wherever it is, his throne is where his headquarters are. At this point, his commercial headquarters get struck. We find in Revelation 18, verses 9 and 10, the kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her will weep and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning, saying, that great city, Babylon, in 1 hour your judgment has come. In 1 hour, the throne of the beast is struck. The judgment comes upon commercial Babylon. A few verses later, the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, for no one buys their merchandise anymore. Well, people were buying and selling with the mark of the beast. There were merchants that were selling with the mark of the beast. Now, it doesn't mean they don't have any merchandise anymore, but what's happening is no one's buying it. Well, why is that? When the throne of the beast gets struck, he also strikes, the kingdom becomes full of darkness. That's the second part of the 5th bowl judgment. Now, I believe the world becomes dark. Now, let's use an example of this, the plague that happened in Egypt, the 9th plague of darkness. The Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand, and that there may be darkness over Egypt. And that was all of Egypt. Darkness which may be felt. So Moses stretched out his hand, and there was a thick darkness in all of Egypt for 3 days. They did not see one another, nor did they arise out from their place for 3 days. This is a thick, the darkness that could be felt. They were under house arrest. No one went outdoors. They were stuck in here for 3 days. Now, of course, the darkness lifted. And I believe the darkness will lift on this fifth bowl judgment as well. It has to for the sixth bowl and seventh bowl judgments to happen. But imagine this type of darkness coming over the kingdom of the beast, not just Rome, where his throne was, or commercial Babylon, wherever that you might think that might be. But it's over the whole world. Now, that was back in Egypt, and that was very difficult during that time. They had lanterns and things like that. But what about if that happens right now? And this present time, when we have electricity is existing and computers are running and streetlights are shining and billboards are bannering and house lamps are lighting, technologies are operating, internet information is flowing, news videos are live streaming, artificial intelligence is functioning, blockchain transactions will be recording at that time, and cryptocurrencies are buying and selling, and the cashless global economy is running and perhaps even booming. What about then? What if that all gets shut down? And there's that kind of blackness, and there's none of the above available at that point. Now we got a problem. Now ultimately, the darkness will lift. But what are they going to do? Now you can have at this point, let's say the whole global economy gets shut down by this darkness, and those things are no longer operable. And I believe that's probably going to be the case. You know, they could come along when the darkness lifts, and the technicians could say, look, we can get this up and running again. We can get this system back in place. But the problem is we can't stop what if the guy does it again? The divine hacker. What if he shuts it all down again? You know, the merchants won't be able to sell anymore, etc. So they've got to deal with God now at this point. They've got to go against God. They've got to take him out so he can no longer do this kind of a thing. So let's talk about the mark of the beast for a minute and the cashless global economy that I believe will be shut down at this point in time when that fifth bowl judgment hits. He says, no one will buy or sell except the one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Now, many of us believe this is going to lead toward a cashless economy. All it simply says is no one can buy or sell unless they have the mark of the beast. You don't get the mark of the beast unless you're eligible for it because you've now committed your worship to the Antichrist. Now you're eligible to receive the mark of the beast. It's not going to be some fast, your wool's not going to be pulled over your eyes, and it's going to be a sleight of the hands, and you get stuck with the mark of the beast. We'll talk about what that possibly is in just a moment. But you have to become eligible to receive it. Now, a lot of us believe that there are technologies that exist today, cryptocurrencies, digital dollars, etc., blockchain technologies, I'll talk about those in just a moment, that the Antichrist will use. Now, these systems will have to be in place before the midpoint of the tribulation when he starts to embrace them and start his cashless global economy. Him and the false prophet can't just do this on day one. This has already got to be in place. So they can just simply take it and move it into their cash register, into their economy. So what are some of these technologies? Technologies exist today where the Antichrist can actually track people. He can control them. He can monitor their every footstep. We're told in the Bible several places that God can search the hearts and the minds of people to see what they're thinking, what their hearts are, where their hearts are at. But the Antichrist can't do that. He's not omnipresent, but he will be able to track people. He will be able to find out through these technologies what their consumer behavior patterns are, if they're complying with his agenda, etc. So let's talk about some things like this about these technologies. Lately, now you're going to notice all these technologies, all these articles, headlines I'm going to give you are recent. Is the coronavirus killing off cash? So we talk about the economy, the Antichrist, if he's going to be able to control everything, he can't have under-the-table cash transactions, money laundering, and things like that. So cash has to be out of the way. Right now, the coronavirus, we've got a lot of people concerned about the virus being carried on cash. Will cash be taken out of the way? That was a political article in April of 2020. Now here's one for you. The International Monetary Fund publishes Cryptocurrency Explainer, saying it could be the next step in the evolution of money. Cryptocurrencies replacing cash. Matter of fact, MasterCard and Visa are making bold moves toward mass crypto adoption. Again, these are recent headlines. What is cryptocurrencies? The IMF came out with this for the general public and explaining that second headline there, what cryptocurrency is. In my book, I explain what cryptocurrency is, and I'm going to show you the video from the IMF in just a moment. Cryptocurrency is a digital currency in which encryption techniques are used to regulate the generation of units of currency and verify the transfer of funds, operating independently of a central bank. This means that it is decentralized, which is very problematic for the central banks of countries to control their own nation's money supply. So in other words, central banks are very concerned that they want to control the money supply in a current states of cryptocurrency. They want to be able to do that. That's why you presently have places like China rolled out their own pilot test of digital currencies. This is a Wall Street Journal in April 2020. Sweden is testing its new central bank digital currencies. America's testing it too, Israel. There's literally about 30 countries right now that are, it's like a race to the moon to see who can get the best cryptocurrency, the best Bitcoin, if you will. And that's where it started. At the end of the economic crunch around 2008, the global economic collapse, the Bitcoin came out. And no one paid a lot of attention to it. And then in 2017, it went up to a cost, it hit a high point of $19,783 for a Bitcoin. That started catching attention. Now the nations are racing to try to get a cryptocurrency. Now, I'm going to play a video for you that we'll talk about from the IMF that explains this better and easier to understand.
When we buy or sell things, the payment is usually processed by a bank or credit card company. Problem number one, the companies often take a cut of the transaction. Two, we have to trust these companies to protect our sensitive data from hackers. Three, most international payments take a long time and are expensive. To solve these problems, we could use a special currency that is secure and based on the science of cryptography, which is a way of protecting information using mathematics. This special type of currency is called a cryptocurrency and only exists in computer networks. When you send someone this special currency, the money goes directly to them, removing the middleman. And at the same time, the transaction is broadcast to the entire network and recorded in a permanent way, which means it's almost impossible to fool the system. Costs of making payments are lower, transactions are faster, especially across countries, and even those people around the globe who don't have bank accounts can buy or sell goods and participate in the global economy. However, there are some risks. The transactions in most cryptocurrencies are anonymous. Some cryptocurrencies can even be untraceable. This can make it easier for the bad guys to make payments without being noticed. If you lose your password, you could lose all your money. At the moment, cryptocurrencies are highly volatile. They can't process large amounts of transactions quickly yet, and they're not even widely accepted. But if we can counter the risks, then this new technology, or some variation of it, can completely change the way we sell, buy, save, invest, and pay our bills. And who knows, this could be the next step in the evolution of money.
So that video is talking about a need for a new special currency, a cryptocurrency. It may be the thing of the future. It changes the way we buy, sell, save, and invest in folks. That video is actually, I believe, came out a couple years ago, and those bugs have been worked out that she was referring to at this point in time. Cryptocurrency is rapidly advancing towards us at this point in time as the new monetary medium of exchange on a global level. Like I said, countries are racing for this. Now, she talked about a ledger system that has to be implemented for that, and then she's referring to what is called the blockchain technology. I gave you a definition of this in the Final Prophecies, which is it's an electronic monitoring system in which a record of transactions made in cryptocurrencies are maintained across several linked computers in a network. The block represents digital information about a transaction, such as the products, participants, date, location, and dollar amount. The chain is the public database where the block information gets stored. It's like the new electronic cash register. You know, digital dollars don't fit in a regular wallet. They need a digital wallet. So cryptocurrencies are digital currencies. They are not, you know, cash and credit cards and things like that. So this is the direction this is going. But blockchain does so much more. Here's some more headlines. We'll keep going along with these. Blockchains may offer solutions to fighting COVID-19. This is the Wall Street Journal in May of 2020. Blockchain could fight COVID-19 as identity, health records, and shared data as rapid response registry for medical professionals. So you see, we're talking about medical records and things like that. Now, some people think, that, for instance, the COVID-19 vaccination, that could actually be part of the mark of the beast. I don't personally think so, but I do believe a vaccination can be restored on the type of health records that could be involved in the blockchain technology if an individual's had the vaccination. The COVID-19 vaccine is not likely going to be injected into someone's forehead or on their right hand. That's not typically where you inject a vaccine. Usually it's in your arm or in your hip. But I don't personally think that's got anything to do with the mark of the beast, other than the fact is we're going to find out that there are things being done right now, DNA modifications and alterations, that actually are very concerning, that may have some role to play in the mark of the beast in more than just an electronic technology. We go on further a little bit more. Why blockchain could be your next form of ID as a world citizen. ID is key for accessing education, healthcare, voting, banking, housing, and other family benefits for all citizens worldwide. The Bank of Canada is exploring digital currency that would replace cash, track, and how people spend money. So in other words, they want to actually track consumer behavior, and they actually, the article goes on talking about they would give that information to tax authorities and police departments and things like that. Tracking, the ability to actually track people's footsteps and their consumer spending habits. The Swedes are getting implants in their hands to replace cash and credit cards. What we've got here, we've got the mark of the beast. It's placed on upon the forehead or upon the hand. So, we already see that this stuff is racing, this technology that probably will lead to the mark of the beast coming into place. Now, there are some pros and cons that come. Oh, I was going to say something here before I get into the pros and cons of the mark of the beast. You think there's only cons, but obviously some people think there's some pros. We're going to talk about that. But the Antichrist will have the ability, if he adopts this type of system, to include you in or shut you down. If you're not, if your consumer spending habits or your general behavior is not fitting into the system, you are shut out of his system. And he can do that with a touch of a button, more than likely. And everything can be, your passport, your medical records, your criminal records, your banking information. All these things now can be put together in a blockchain scenario. So the pros of the mark of the beast. Now, obviously, some people think there's some pros. Guess what? Those who don't take the mark of the beast, the Antichrist beheads them, namely Christians. So one of the pros is you won't get beheaded. Now, that's a good motivation factor. You become officially recognized as a worshiper of the Antichrist. Now, some people like that prestige. So, for instance, a Catholic gets born and says, I was born a Catholic, I will always be a Catholic. Some people like the prestige that comes with being an official worshiper of the Antichrist. When you can buy as a consumer or sell as a merchant, which is, you've got to feed your family, you've got to exist in his global economy. And you obtain a personal world citizen digital ID that connects you to all the global services such as universal health care, universal basic income, global banking, world travel, public education, and more. So those are the pros that will be sold for this mark of the beast scenario, plus you get to be, Now, he's not going to, people have a choice to take the mark of the beast, but the choice is if you don't take it, you get killed. So it's not really a choice, but he wants them to volitionally say, I want to take your mark of the beast, I want to worship you. Now, there will be I believe, some reasonable people thinking things through, and they'll be hearing about these cons that exist if you take the mark of the beast. So, for instance, the cons are your benefits are only going to last for 3.5 years, because it's all going to end when Jesus Christ returns and takes the Antichrist out. And so, like I said, the fifth bowl judgment, I think, shuts down this whole system anyways. You receive loathsome body sores. You end up drinking of the wine of God's wrath. You lose your shot at salvation. If you're alive at the time, you'll actually watch the Antichrist and the false prophet get cast into the lake of fire. You'll get a ticket to the white throne judgment, which is not where you want to be, and that's only for unbelievers. And you'll be cast in the lake of fire at the end of the millennium. You will be there with your superhero, the Antichrist. Folks, you do not want to deal with this issue. Those cons are a major issue. I mean, why would you even think about that? However, I believe that kind of discussion could be going forward at that time. Now, are those pros enough for people to actually commit to the Antichrist and take the mark of the beast? Or is there more to it than meets the mark? Are those temporal perks sufficient enough to make that type of decision and run the risk of losing the potential of eternal salvation? Is there a supernatural component to the mark? In my book, I write this, in addition to the technologies. I write this in the Final Prophecies. Maybe Satan's prodigy, the Antichrist, will turn the big garden lie full circle. Perhaps the seed of the serpent will do more than echo Satan's sentiment that you'll be like God and up the ante and promise to show his worshipers how they can actually become like God. A shot at immortality. Now that might be enough to sway someone off the fence to worship the Antichrist and take his mark, especially if something incorporated within the mark contained a supernatural component. So I go on to say, what if the Antichrist says to the people that are wanting to take the mark of the beast, in order to achieve a divine nature like me, you must become more like me, which means you must undergo a human enhancement that upgrades your DNA to resemble mine. In other words, has he had a DNA enhancement? Some people believe he was. There's genetic modifications going on at this point in time, DNA alterations going on, people seeking to get psychic powers, superhuman abilities. I'll give you a couple headlines here. Superpowers aren't just for superheroes anymore. Want some? San Diego Tribune. Brain chips could soon give people super intelligence. A couple more we'll talk about here. Superhuman abilities could lurk under your skin. Insertable technology could launch a new type of human. The future of humanity's superpowers are within our reach. We stand at an unprecedented juncture in our history. It's not a question of if we develop superpowers, it's a question of when. The U.S. intelligence warns of AI, artificial intelligence, human hybrid soldiers coming from China. So these are technologies that are already happening with DNA alterations and modifications. They're working on things where there can be healing, to help people to see better, to heal faster, to hear better, with deafness and things like that. Now, is God going to fault someone for wanting to buy and sell some food to feed his family, or for wanting to see better? I don't think so. I think there's something much deeper than that. Now, when they receive the mark of the beast, the grace, forgiveness, and mercy of God is no longer available to them. That's God's heart. What do they do? Do they alter themselves? And I don't know. I'm just speculating. Do they alter their DNA to a point, and it wouldn't take much, where they're no longer made in the image of God? They're no longer in the human genome anymore? Do they become unredeemable? Is that a possibility? Is that why they can't be saved, that they're going to experience God's wrath and be cast into the lake of fire? Now remember, at this time, Satan has been cast down to the earth with the fallen angels. This has already happened several years prior to what's going on. And how is he going to show up? Is he going to come down here with devil horns, fiery wings, and pitchforks, him and his fallen angels? Or are they going to take on a different appearance? Is there going to be involved, is there some deception involved with the extraterrestrials? Is it possible that there's some kind of satanic end-time deception involving USOs and extraterrestrials? Like I said, they're going to be cast down to the earth. Now, a friend of mine, L.A. Marzulli, he has an interesting saying. It's kind of clever. And of course, he believes there's a connection between the deception and the UFOs and the extraterrestrials. He says, when we go up, they show up. Meaning, when we, the church, go up, the extraterrestrials, UFOs, they show up. He goes, watch out for the UFO mothership hovering over a major city or several large crafts perched over multiple cities when this happens. Now, I personally agree in some levels with him, but let me qualify this. I don't necessarily think they're going to happen immediately when the church gets raptured. I believe the Marian apparitions will come. I believe the harlot world religion will be propped up first. But I do believe there is potential UFO deception, not extraterrestrials, but fallen angels masquerading as intelligent beings of a higher order, stronger, more capacity, from saying they're from different planets or something like that. They're not going to show. Are they going to show themselves as fallen angels? They got kicked out of heaven because they were bad guys? I don't think so. They're going to come down here, and remember, Satan's had over 2,000 years to plan this out, since he heard about he would no longer have restraint around 52 AD. So is this sci-fi, or is this potentially a coming reality? Here's a few headlines. Possible mile-wide UFO spotted by British Airlines pilot, Fox News. Fleet of UFOs followed U.S. aircraft by Navy pilots. Congress is taking up the UFO threat seriously. Pentagon consultant briefed senators on discovery of off-world vehicles not made of this earth. So I'm just going to leave that with you. L.A. Marzulli is pretty strongly teaching on this stuff. You can visit his site and go, that's thing. But is it possible that the lie will actually be the antithesis of the truth, that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life? But is that going to show that the Antichrist is God and that you can be like him, that Satan didn't lie in the garden? Could that be where that goes? So let's talk about the sixfold judgment as we start to wind down. It says here that the great river Euphrates will be dried up. The kings of the east will deploy from Armageddon. There'll be three frog-like demons that come out of the mouths of Satan, Antichrist, and the false prophet. These demons perform signs and encourage the other kings of the earth to gather their armies from Armageddon. So Satan employs three frog-like friends. They come out of his mouth. They're not demon-possessed. In my estimation, these are individual entities, probably high-ranking fallen angels. Why they look like frogs, I don't know. They should have looked more like lions, right? I don't know. But if they exist, whoever they are, they have to be performing signs that convince people throughout the world that they can go fight God, and they can go fight God, and they can win God, and they can get their cashless society up and running, and the merchants can sell, and they won't be weeping anymore, and the kings of earth will not be weeping anymore. Somehow these three frogs coming out of the mouth of Satan with his plan convince the kings of the earth to mobilize and deploy for the final battle against God. I like a quote from John MacArthur about this situation. He says in one of his sermons on the seven bowl judgments, maybe this is the final act of rabid anti-Semitism to destroy the remaining Jews. Now you remember the Lord is going to hide some Jews, and we learn about that back in chapter 12. They're going to be protected and nourished for the second half of the tribulation. Maybe they're going to come and rout them out and massacre them all in hopes that God will tuck his tail and go away and hide and leave them alone. So they appear to be thinking they are going to be able to kill the Jews, which we said that was probably plan B of Satan's plan in the war in heaven. And if they do that, they can keep Jesus from coming. Or maybe they're so foolish that they think they can come and try to kill all the Jews hiding in Petra, southern Jordan, the Jewish remnant, and Jesus will come down and they can ambush him. Whatever they're thinking, it's probably got something to do like with John MacArthur's saying. Now, while they're doing this and they're assembling to attack the Jewish people and completely exterminate the Jewish people, God is laughing in heaven. We're finding out in Psalm 2, it says here, the armies are leading Armageddon and God laughs. Why do the nations rage and why do the people plot a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and his anointed, referring to Jesus Christ, saying, let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away the cords that join us. He who sits in heaven shall laugh. The Lord shall hold them in derision. Then he shall speak to them in his wrath and his distress and his deep displeasure. Yet I have set my king on the holy mountain. I will declare the decree. The Lord has said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. What are they thinking? That they can take on God in the great battle, the day of the Lord, God Almighty? The kings of the east are coming across the dried up Euphrates. These three frog miracles are getting the other kings in the armies to gather there. So we come back here and we talk about now they're making their way to the Armageddon campaign. They're in the valley of Jezreel. All these armies are deployed and assembling. And as they're marching, getting over there and deploying, bam, God hits the seventh bowl judgment on them. And that judgment talks about the greatest earthquake in the history of man. I mean, it's going to be bigger than a 10.0 by far when you see the details. And then they get hit with hailstones, like I said, they're probably the weight of 57 pounds or more. And they're so bad that the cities fall and the islands flee and the mountains disappear. Now here they go. They're on the way to fight God, try to get their system back up and running. They're all in. They've still got loathsome sores probably on them. Their waters have been turned to blood, so they probably got all the water they can store up is all they got to drink. And here's what I say about probably what's going through their mind in the final prophecies when now they've seen this earthquake and this hailstone coming. As a result of the Lord's 1-2 punch combo, the greatest earthquake and largest hailstones ever, the Armageddonites have to go to the distance and finish the fight against God. This is because many of them no longer have a place of retreat since some of their cities have been destroyed by the great earthquake. Adding to their stress is the daunting possibility that their hometowns were toppled, their families and friends were probably buried underneath the rubble. That is if they survived the hailstone's assault at all. This is what they're doing. They're coming probably with loathsome sores, minimal drinking water. If they survive the great earthquake and the hailstones, they think they're going to take out God. They're going to get him to tuck his tail and leave them alone. And then things even get worse for them. Jesus is going to return. We find on Revelation 19, now I saw in heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it was faithful and true, and in righteousness he judges and makes war. A few verses later we find out, then I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the birds that fly in the midst of heaven, come and gather together for the supper of the great God, that you may eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of captains, the flesh of mighty men, the flesh of horses, and those who sit on them, and the flesh of all people. In other words, everyone who's gathered for the great day of the battle of God Almighty, who just went through hailstones and the great earthquake. And now they're looking above and they're seeing birds of prey flying over them. And they're probably not thinking in the back of their mind, well, that's because we're going to get the Jewish remnant and they'll feed on them, or we're going to get Jesus and they'll feed on them. They're probably realizing those birds are coming for their flesh. Then we find out what happens when Jesus comes. The birds have assembled. And I saw the beast, the Antichrist, and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war against him who sat on the horse and against his army. Then the beast was captured, and then the false prophet who worked signs in his presence. These two were cast alive into the lake of fire, burning with brimstone. And the rest were killed with the sword which proceeded out of the mouth of him who sat on the horse, and all the birds were filled with their flesh. So, like I said, we talked about some good news in the beginning. If you're a believer, you will not go through these types of things. But for those of you who are not, you should be sitting on the edge of your chair going, oh my goodness, or you're concerned about your loved ones who are not saved. Let's talk about them, because there are some instructions to them, some good important news, benedictions, things they need to know if they get left behind. Hopefully you're not one of them, but someone you love and know may be one among them. There's several things as we get into the tribulation that these people are told. Revelation 7:9 encourages persecuted believers that they are not suffering alone in their struggles, but they're all part of a great multitude which no one can number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. Revelation 11:14 speaks directly to believers that somehow survived through the first two woes of the fifth and sixth trumpet judgments, that there is only one more woe to come, and the third woe, it will come quickly. Now that concludes the second half of the tribulation, and that includes those bowl judgments. The third woe unleashes those, the seventh trumpet unleashes those seven bowls. Now, they are also told in Revelation 6, verse 11, that there will be 3 periods of Christian martyrdom coming after the rapture. I believe that we're told that there'll be the fifth seal saints. Now, the fifth seal saints ask an interesting question, and I believe this is because they're living in the gap initially, the post-rapture, pre-trib gap. They ask God, how much longer is that going to continue? How long, O Lord, will you continue until they judge, you avenge the blood on those who have killed us and martyred us? Now, they're told that you must rest a little longer till your fellow servants and their brethren who will die like you has passed. So I could be wrong on my time slots here, but I believe the fellow fifth seal saints are killed by the harlot during the gap. They don't know how much longer that's going to continue. The harlot continues her killing campaign. She's drunk with the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus during the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. She gets desolated by the 10 kings at the midpoint. Then the Antichrist picks up the persecution among the brethren of the fellow servants of the fifth seal saints, and they get beheaded for not taking the mark of the beast. A few more words of instruction. Revelation 12:12 prepares believers alive at the midpoint of the trib period for the arrival of the earth of Satan and his defeated angelic troops. These believers are made aware that the devil has come down, he's having great wrath, and he knows that his time is short. Revelation 13:9 and 10 commends believers to be patient and warns them to not seek revenge for what's happening to them. They are advised that if anyone has an ear, let him hear. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. This is the patience and the faith of the saints. Remember, unlike Job, where Satan was instructed not to kill him, Satan is no longer restrained at this point in time, and people are dying. He has no holds barred, and if they don't worship the Antichrist, or if they didn't follow the harlot world religion, they were killed forcibly. A couple more and then we'll conclude it. Revelation 14 reinforces about the patience of the saints of the last encouragement I told you, reinforces what was said previously above in Revelation 13:9-10. This particular passage has a specific application to those refusing to receive the mark of the beast. These believers are told, here's the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Then I heard a loud voice from heaven saying to me, write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors and their works follow them. So, blessed are you, even though you would die, is what he's saying at this point in time, because you will have rest now from all the things that have been going on. the things that have been happening in the trumpets and the bowls, if you survived to this point, and you will be with the Lord. And then the sixth, final one, when the armies are gathering to Armageddon, he says, fast forwarding the sixth bowl judgment, the believers are instructed, behold, I am coming as a thief. Blessed is he who watches and keeps his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. Now, he's not coming as a thief in the rapture. That's already happened. He's coming as a thief to deprive the Antichrist and the false prophet and the armies of their victory. So, folks, those are the final prophecies. That's the worst of the worst. If those days were not cut short, no flesh would survive. So I implore you, if you don't know Jesus Christ at this point in time and have not received him as your Savior, you do not want any part of what you just watched on this presentation. You can receive Jesus Christ as your Savior by simply confessing with your mouth that he is the Lord and believing in your heart that he rose from the dead. And you shall not be put to shame, but you shall be saved.